Okay. Thanks everybody for joining this morning. So this morning's topic, I hope hopefully useful for you. Something that I've found useful is this idea that everyone remember, I'm sure, the Jim Collins book From Good to Great, where in the book he talks about the difference between good organizations, solid, performing okay, versus the people that really, or the organizations and the teams that run businesses that transcend good and get to great. So on that theme, this morning is, how do we get a good team to go to becoming exceptional? And that's something I've done a few times in my leadership career. And I thought it would be useful just on today's session, just to share a couple of things, because we can go through obvious things and we'll talk about the foundations, but actually there are a couple of things that I've learned that once you do them, they just get that next level of engagement, and they give you as a leader that much more, I guess, opportunity to inspire and really get the team galvanized and performing at the next level. So that's the idea of this morning's workshop. And as ever, these are an opportunity to take your foot off the gas of the constant activity in a week and get some quality thinking space. This is all about thinking space. We very rarely get that nowadays. So hopefully it's useful this morning for you to have an hour to yourself or with this group and think about you, your business, and perhaps some of the things that you can do that might change the way that you're leading. And there's a few things we'll talk about today. So we'll talk about finding intrinsic motivation and your why. We'll talk about finding team motivation. And then I'll talk you through an exercise you might have seen before. If you've seen it, just as an opportunity to come at it with fresh eyes today and think, actually, what does this mean, and how might I integrate this into my business or the work that I'm doing with my teams? So hopefully useful. So I love this Mark Twain quote. You'll have seen this, I'm sure. The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. So why is really important for all of us. And I when I run client workshops and programs, I ask a couple of questions of the client teams that I work with, and these seem like fairly normal questions to ask, but it's really interesting what happens. And when Steve was sales director at one of the companies he worked for, we ran this exercise with his team. It was really interesting. Steve will remember it. But what I think is really valuable about doing this exercise is most people have never thought about the answer to these two questions. So you'll see the two questions. What do you love most about your role? So that's about finding energy, finding passion, finding motivation, right? So what is it people love most about their role? And interestingly, if you've got people in roles and actually what they love most about it is work they're doing day to day, like the 60 to 80%, those people will be flying, right? If you talk to people and they say, well, actually, I love this bit, but I don't do a lot of it, you'll find their motivation, they're probably struggling to find motivation. So it's a really interesting question to ask, because it helps you as a leader start to help that person identify what perhaps should be the majority of the work, and you might be able to help them pivot if that's the case. And then the second question, which is really motivation question, is why is it important that you succeed? And asking people for their motivations. And this, I'm always fascinated by the answers to this question, because they're so varied. So for what I've found is that people that are perhaps a bit earlier in their career, it's about being ambitious. It's about financial reward. It's about being successful and being seen to be successful. And as people transition through their careers, the answers change. So as you get to middle of the career, it might be about finding purpose in the work, might be about supporting their family, paying the mortgage, all that kind of stuff. And then as you get towards the end of people's careers, later in the careers, actually it's about the contribution, it's about helping other people, it's about stabilizing the organization, creating succession, all that kind of thing. And it's fascinating. So what I've noticed when you ask these questions one-to-one, you get under the surface of what's really going on for that person. When you ask them in a team environment, you get this opportunity to share that creates new insights for people, because people will say, I never really thought about it like that. And that combination is really powerful. So I share them with you because they're like they seem like innocuous questions, but they're really powerful when you ask them and give people the space to really process them. So do feel free to kind of pick that up. And in our breakout session, or when we start to talk about it, I'd love to hear your views on this. So have a think about the answers to these two questions for you in your business as well. Because when we do this with leaders and teams, it's also really useful for the team to hear what the leader loves most about their role and why the leader's so motivated. It's really, really powerful stuff, because that again is, when we think about, I've said in previous sessions, engagement, motivation, the big thing that people want engagement and motivation, they almost take those for granted. I should feel engaged and motivated. But what they want to perform at the next level is to feel inspired, right? And actually, very often we're inspired by other people's stories. Why is it important that my manager wants to be successful, drive that success in the company? That can be really inspiring for people. So I'll kind of come back to these questions and ask you just to contemplate and play them back for yourselves. And this is really important. Well, I remember when I first went into sales management, I took over an existing team that was in place. It was about 5 people. I had to recruit up to 8, and then we got a technical person as well, so we were up to 9. And the team were already a good team. And I remember thinking, this is a really well-established team. 2 of the people that were in that team had applied for the job that I got. So I was an incoming manager from another business division. And so there was a bit, it wasn't resistance, but there was a bit of, kind of eyeing me up and why did you get it and I didn't? And that was an interesting dynamic. And so one of the first things I did was had a conversation with everyone about these types of questions. I don't know if they were these exact questions back in the day, because I wasn't perhaps as experienced as I am now. But I was asking, what are the bits of the job you really like? Where do you think you're, succeeding and flying? And what's motivating you, right? And by doing that, by having those conversations with everybody, it really helped them to tap into that sense of purpose and motivation for themselves. And then I did a second exercise, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that was really interesting, because that, for me, if you've got a good team already, and the question is, how do I get them to their next level? Sometimes that's a challenge, right? This is a really good starting point, as well as all the other things you do around clarity of expectations, regular reviews, all of that stuff. But this I found really interesting. And I'm sure you've all seen this, The Golden Circle by Simon Sinek, right? And he talks about finding your why. And very often we'll ask what or how questions, but we don't ask why questions around motivation. And what I found is really useful, not just as a leader, but as a coach, is to ask the questions in almost this order. So not necessarily what, how, why, but ask, what is it you're trying to achieve with your teams, or what levels of performance are you looking to get to? Then ask, why is that important? Okay, so what is it you're trying to achieve? Why is that important to you? Like the question before, why is it vital that you succeed? And when you ask questions in that order, it helps people to get clarity. So the what is important, because that's goal focused. So this is where I'm aiming to get to, like the classic grow model for coaching. The why is really useful, because most people they'll say, I'm trying to get to here. And when you ask them, why is that important to you? Most of the time they haven't really thought about it. So it gives them a chance to stop and pause and reflect for themselves. And that creates that motivation. And of course, from there, once you've got the what and the why, then how becomes really powerful, because that's when you get to tangible, right? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you can also say, how can I support you to get there? So as a leader, thinking about it in that order is really useful. But what we tend to do, and I'm guilty of this myself at times, is saying, right, what are we trying to do? Define that. Okay, what's the plan? How do we get there? And we miss out the why. But the why is where the power is. If we think about from good to exceptional, why is what really is going to help our teams to get there and help us as leaders to guide them in that direction. So intrinsic motivation is really important. And the questions that we ask, the way we coach that, is vital to make it happen. So I did this in this team that I was working with, got everybody together, and then understood one-to-one. And then I always remember we had a first team meeting, like a regional team meeting, and I managed to get I wasn't a full team at that point, so I think I'd recruited two people. I had one space and a technical space. So I had two gaps in the team. We were a kind of 7-person team at that point, eight including me. And in the first team meeting, I asked a couple of these questions. So I went back, I'd asked these questions one-to-one of people, and then I asked them in the group and just asked them to share as part of the group, and I shared mine. And as people were sharing, I saw the light bulbs going on. Everybody started to go, right, okay, that's what motivates Annette, that's what motivates Paul, that's what motivates Matt. And it was really interesting, because in sharing it also adjusted people's own motivations. So they're like, that's important to me as well. I hadn't thought about it. And it was really valuable, a really valuable exercise. And so taking time to share these motivations, understand team motivation, it connects everybody, but it also gives them that greater, almost depth of empathy and appreciation for each other within that team environment. And we went on to talk about other things, which I'll go on to now. So then I said to the team, and I'd had an exercise that I'd been part of as part of a team years before that. And we'd called it a team contract exercise. A manager I worked for did this team exercise. It was really powerful. And so I adopted that and thought, right, I'm going to run that as part of this, this new team that I pulled together. So everyone shared their motivation individually. And then we did this exercise I called I've kind of amended it. I call it team chartering now, because contract sometimes turns people off. Contract's quite a strong word. So I call it a team charter exercise. And I did this with this team. This was the first time I ever did it. And what we did was I kind of came prepared. So everybody had a Post-it notepad and a pen. And I briefed them. This was the slide. So everyone's got a Post-it notepad. Has everyone got a pad? Yes. So in a moment, I'm going to change slides, I would say. And I'd like you just to spend some time on your own, just writing down the answers to the questions on the next slide when they come up. Okay. And do it in a way that is one answer per note page. So write what is one answer to one question, peel that off, and then start the next one. And do that until your answers dry up, until you think you've answered all the questions. And if there are things on your mind, just capture them. And when we're finished, we'll then regroup as a team. And that takes 5 to 10 minutes maximum. It's surprising how quickly that happens. And you end up with all of these different Post-it notes. So then what we did was we took all the Post-it notes and we put them on a flip chart or a big white wall. And then the team together, I kind of facilitated, started to cluster the answers into groups that are similar. So, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then what we decided to do was write them up in a team contract or a team charter. And from there, we were sharing them at meetings. We had everybody had them saved as backgrounds on their laptops. We had lots of different ways in which we were able to then make that a kind of commitment that we had for each other, with each other, as we worked together going forward from there. And it was a really powerful exercise. So here's the questions that I asked. These are some examples. So these are personal, right? So I want people to think about this from a singular personal perspective. How do I want our team to interact with each other? What are my expectations of other team members? What can the team expect from me? How do I want to be treated? How will I commit to treating other people? How do I want to feel during and after meetings together? How should we work together? What type of support should we offer each other? What standards will we meet? What will we aspire to achieve with each other? And describe our perfect working relationships. And these are just the questions that I asked, but you can have lots of different variations of these, depending on your team and what you're trying to achieve. But this was a really good outline. And lots of different answers came up, and everybody, you can imagine, contributed towards that sharing of ideas. And then when we clustered, what we did was we'd have, there might be respect, integrity, honesty. So we'd say, right, can we put those in a group? Yes, so they'd all go into a group. And then there'd be other things. And once we'd gathered the group, we then named the group. Said, right, so what should we call this group? So that might have been respect, integrity, and honesty, right? Okay, that's one cluster. And then we'd pull another group together. And then what happened was I asked one of the team to put it together into a document. And they did it in an Excel document. So this is that first team charter I did, right? So this is what came up, and you'll see I called it team contract at the time. And so I'll go around in order. So having fun was important, right? Work is tough. It's always hard. When you work hard, sometimes it can be difficult. So actually having a mantra where we want to have fun actually is quite useful, because we know that people having fun, people who are engaged, are more productive, right? Energized, helping people to feel energized in the work that they do, and when they're with each other. Being helpful and interactive. So helpful with each other, interacting with each other, being proactive about that. Motivation, we want to feel motivated after we've had meetings together or time together. Highly productive. So, and this was interesting because there were a couple of examples of the team where people weren't necessarily getting to the actions they said that were important, right? So we started to talk about productivity, and productivity meant actually committing and doing the things we say we're going to do. Working together and having this family feel. And it was really interesting because this team I led, we ended up, the team decided we wanted to, we created a team name, and we called ourselves the Southern Family. So we were in the south of England. It was the Southern Family. It's really interesting that started to set a bit of a benchmark in the business for what great teamwork looked like. And a lot of it was driven by these exercises that we did. Work together, family, team spirit, and team pride, and a desire to outperform other teams. And it was really interesting because the team were quite proud to tell other teams we're going to be the best team. It created a bit of internal competition that was positive. It wasn't arrogant or aggressive. It was just we're aiming to be the best, and that was quite interesting because it sets a standard. It was interesting to keep one-to-ones outside of meetings. So because I inherited an existing team, sometimes that team, a couple of people said sometimes it feels like we're in a team meeting, but some people will peel off into one-to-ones, and I find that distracting. So we said, okay, so we want to keep one-to-ones outside of meetings. We're not saying you can't do that, but just don't do it when there's a group discussion. Yeah, okay, we agreed that. And as a leader, that enabled me to start to monitor that and call it out. So it was really useful for me as a leader. Sharing successes and making sure that we were supportive when we shared successes. So if someone shared a success, people didn't roll their eyes. They were all, we were all cheerleaders for each other, which was really useful. Giving constructive feedback and challenging each other and learning from each other, and being open to that feedback as well. Encouraging each other. And then the final one was about supporting each other and working in a supportive environment, creating this environment for ourselves where it's okay to make mistakes. Don't keep making them, right? Doesn't mean you can keep making the same mistake over and over, but actually people can come if they've made a mistake. They can say, look, I've made an error. I need some help fixing it or whatever. And then providing them with emotional and business guidance as a part of the way that we operate together. And I have to say one of the things that we did with this team charter was we would, at the start of every team meeting, so every quarter we got together as a team, and then we had a monthly online meeting. This would always be the first slide. So this was, it had Southern Family, the Southern Family on the top, and that would be the first opening slide every meeting. And we'd start with a few minutes just as people were coming in. How you doing? What have you been up to? How have you lived the charter this month? So it's quite a nice way to just keep it alive, because if you do these exercises once and then it gets put in the drawer on the back burner, people forget about it. As leaders, our job is also to keep this front of mind and make sure that the team are bought into this. Okay, so they're the couple of things that I thought would be useful to talk about today. So finding motivation, those kind of key questions and those one-to-one conversations, and then this idea of the team charter, or finding a way to galvanize the team around some key principles in working that really help you as a leader and the team buy in, and hopefully get that level of inspiration that we really want to get people from good, just being good, to actually performing at the next level, exceptional performance. Okay, we won't do breakouts today because we're a small group. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What initial feedback first? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, Justin, when you were talking and you showed the contract on the screen, I've done something similar. Perhaps it's more common than we think, but obviously to try and get people's feedback. I'm just wondering, when I look at the way that contract's constructed, whether it was easier pre-COVID, you know, when people were actually, because one of the things was talking about having one-to-ones, you know, outside of the main meeting, and you know, those spontaneous conversations used to happen a lot more. Now it's probably it might look a little bit different in the current environment, because I think people have their needs or their feelings are slightly different about the way that they interact at work.
Yeah, agreed, Steve. Yeah, agreed. It's interesting. I think I'm certainly seeing a lot more businesses coming together in person more frequently again now.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, those in-person, you know, team meetings are back on the agenda more frequently. And I think actually, you know, a lot of the clients I work with are also saying that's intentional, because they're spending so much time on Zoom and Teams that actually getting them in the room together, getting that physical connection back is really important, because people feel a little bit
Sure.
disconnected, don't they, at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting that people probably appreciate that more now. Actually, it used to just be
Yeah.
another way of words. It's sort of almost a benefit. It's seen as something that's a nice thing to do to get together. Whereas before it was just one of those things of, yeah, okay, we just see each other in the office. Now we probably make more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's also a point in there, Steve, about the need for it more, that now that we're more remote, having that framework that the team's operating within, because we're soulless so often now, to have that sort of grounding and that foundation to come back to is really important.
Yeah. I agree, Chris.
Well, it's interesting. I think obviously you've been in larger organizations where teams do this quite often, whereas I think within dentistry and smaller teams, the dental nurses and dental will maybe find this quite a challenge because they've never been asked before.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to be done maybe in a one-to-one to start with, just to get the feeling that they can say these things out loud.
Yeah.
And then bring them into the team meeting. But I think it's great. I'm learning all the time.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Fiona. You're right. It's interesting. I've facilitated this a few times for clients as well, and you know, smaller businesses that perhaps aren't the big corporations. And you are right that it takes a bit of teasing out, because people aren't immediately forthcoming. They're like, well, they kind of wait. Everyone's waiting for someone else to say something. But once it starts, it's like that ripple effect. It really does draw on people's kind of that experience, and actually starts to get them thinking differently, because very often people are they're kind of doing the work day to day.
Yeah.
They're not thinking about motivation. They're kind of, it's almost an expectation to just turn up, do what they do, and go home. And actually, to get them thinking a bit more deeply about this, if we think about, you know, a lot of businesses right now, dentistry is no exception, have recruitment challenges, right? So trying to recruit quality people is quite a challenge for a lot of businesses at the moment. Retention has become quite a challenge for a lot of businesses. And actually, if you start to trace those things back to, okay, how do we improve retention and engagement at work? A lot of what we're talking about is kind of part of how a leader can do that. And only the leader can do it, right? The team aren't going to do it for themselves. And it's the same when you're recruiting, when you're trying to recruit and attract talent. The first thing that people do when they, you know, come into your business, whether that's for an interview or an experience, they're kind of looking around. How engaged are the people? Is this somewhere I want to work? What's the manager like? How do we get on? How interested in me are they? Are they thinking beyond just the, right, here's your 9-to-5 job, here's the job description, yada, yada, yada. And it's really interesting that these are the things that, you know, my personal experience is that this is leadership, and it's not obvious. And so we're just trying to tease out some of those things that aren't as obvious, but do really make the difference in a business. Yeah.
And how do you work out, because some people will just say things because they think you want to hear them. You know, how do you sort out the bullshit from the real reality?
That's a great question, Fiona. Intuition.
Yeah.
Intuition.
Yeah, I would agree. And it was one of the points that I wrote down as Justin was talking there, Fiona, and it's around that front of the head versus back of the head. You know, people just giving you what they think you want to hear, but there's a fundamental piece that has to be in place, and it's the point you touched on earlier, and that's that psychological safety. It's okay to speak your mind. It's okay to be brutally honest. It's okay to say something that maybe I don't agree with. You're just motivated by money. Wow, really? That's what motivates you. That's fine. That's their motivation. You're not going to change that. You have to embrace it, accept it, and help them get to where they want to go. But in intuition and just creating that feeling that you're trusted, they're talking to somebody they can trust. It's not going to go any further, and they can be open and honest, and it takes a few attempts as well.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree, Chris. Sometimes you've got to, these aren't, single events. You might be teasing it out, having multiple conversations before you do this, the team contract or team chartering exercise. You might decide, actually, I really need to make sure that everybody's comfortable, aligned, wants to be part of it. Because it's interesting when you start to have those motivation conversations, it also helps you to understand, which of the team members are really committed, really want to be here, are going to do what we need them to do, that discretionary effort, versus those people that actually it is just a 9 to 5. They don't want to think about it any more than that. And it's not right or wrong, but it does. As a leader in a business, you also start to think, okay, who's going to be able to be a future leader in the business, or who can we start to delegate more tasks to, who's got opportunities to really add more value to themselves, the business, and to customers as well.
And how do I make best use of my time as a leader as well?
You
don't want to expend effort on, you can't coach somebody who doesn't want to be coached. They have to have that open-minded approach to it. So don't bother coaching. Have management conversations. Have performance conversations with them. Don't try and force them into that coaching, because you're just wasting your time and effort on something that isn't going to give them or you any reward. Just frustration.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's interesting, because I think earlier in my career, if you've asked me, is everybody coachable, I would have said yes. But I think I've had a similar experience to you, Chris, that not everyone is coachable, because not everybody wants to be coached. So you're absolutely right. You have to adjust and flex your leadership style depending on the person's needs and what you've discovered about, what motivates them and allows you to get the optimal level of performance for that person.
Yeah, and please don't take that as they get less time and attention. They get the same time and attention, just different type of time and attention to coaching and developmental conversations.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really useful. Really useful. Manjula, how about you? I'm interested in your thoughts on this. You're on mute, Manjula, if you're there.
She's gone back to the gym.
Yeah. Shower.
One thing, just to get a bit of conversation going here. So I have multifaceted teams. So I've got 4 sales teams who operate in different spheres and through different channels, etc. I've got 2 administration teams, and I've got a BI team within my greater sales and operations function. And naturally, they're all very, very different. So the way I'm thinking of approaching this is to bring everybody together, explain what we're doing, and share with them my beliefs and where I'd like to go, then splitting them off into their individual teams for them to work on their own independent team charters and come up with a team charter for their team, but then to pull out the strands of commonality and then build into a bigger sort of sales operations team charter, which would only be based on everything that's come out. Do we think that approach would work, would have value?
I certainly do, Chris. Yeah, I do.
I only have a very small team, so but I'm going to use this in the next team meeting and definitely on their one-to-ones as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah. If you've got a large, multiple teams, Chris, I think that's the optimal way to do it. And you're almost delegating to each of your team leads, right, to run their own session, because they are going to have differences, and it'll feel more personal for each team if they do create their own versions of this. And then I really like the idea of, and perhaps when you think about the charter for your sales, full sales and operations, perhaps that's something that you with your team leads pluck out the strands so that you almost run it as an exercise with your team leads.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button for ages. I'm doing this on my phone, and normally it's on my laptop, and it's really easy for sliding across and round and round. And so, yeah, I wanted to make a comment about that coachability thing. You know, I think it's timing as well. So you've got to keep in touch with, you know, motivations changing as well. So if you're having your regular one-to-ones as well as the team meetings, you know, those appointments kind of need to be scheduled way in advance, and you need to stick to them. Otherwise, certainly on the receiving end, I've found myself feeling ignored, you know, because the emphasis has been more on the team gathering and not on the individual. So the balance needs to be right. And also, I think before those group storming sessions, perhaps recognize which individuals are more introverted and need to think about things before they feel they can contribute. And again, if they don't speak up in the one-to-ones, they'll speak up with you.
Yeah, that's another really good point.
Do you think it's worth maybe giving questions? I understand what you're saying, Manjula, there. So is it worth giving the questions beforehand for the maybe more ones to perhaps think it through and write things down beforehand?
Because I mean, a simplistic way of thinking introvert versus extrovert thinking style is the introverts are that much more reflective, so they reflect, then they act, then they reflect again, versus the extroverts act, then think about it, then act again. Yeah, so, and that's an easy way to recognize that, isn't it, in your own teams, even if you don't know them that well, but you're quite new, you can just be a sharp observer of behavior.
Yeah, useful.
In your experience, Justin, would you give the questions beforehand, or is it better to be off the cuff, as it were, or Chris or Steve?
Yeah, I think there's advantages to both. If you've got enough time in the exercise, and I think, you know, one of the things that I did on the times when I've done it, the other thing I've done is I've kind of got a bit of light background music playing. So, you know, like nothing too heavy, but just a bit of background music so that people feel relaxed and calm, and just don't rush it, right? So if it takes, I said 5 to 10 minutes on the post-it notepads. If it takes 15, it takes 15. You know, there's no right or wrong time frame for it. It's as long as people need to be able to reflect and you know, come up with the answers for themselves. I think Manjula makes a really good point, because for some people they will, you know, they might do the exercise and then afterwards think, oh, we should have written this or we should have said that. So perhaps a bit of priming. If you've got some time together, maybe even say to people, look, we're gonna cover this exercise later on in the day. I just want to give you some forward visibility of it, and maybe share some of the questions. So if you want to reflect on those, we'll be doing the exercise this afternoon, for example. But I thought I'd share these with you now so that you just got some reflection time between now and that session, and then go into the session. So there's a few ways you could do it that hopefully give, regardless of how people, you know, whether they're introverted, extroverted by nature, but gives them that opportunity to really add the value and contribute, because it is about each individual feeling as if they've had the space to really consider it and make the contribution themselves. Yeah. Your other point, Manjula, about one-to-ones and team working is really, really interesting as well. I must admit, I've had sales teams, when I took over this sales team, the previous manager had a handover with me. It was interesting because he said to me, you've got two guys here who need very little management. So he said, I've not really spent a lot of time with them. and that's interesting, because when I started working with the team, and I was, you know, made sure that actually I distributed coaching time, certainly for the first 12 months, fairly evenly across the team. And one of the pieces of feedback I had from both of those team members was I felt a little bit out of the loop.
Yeah, it's like having teenage tantrums. They get more attention, don't they?
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't be reinforcing that.
No. And then there are those performance management situations. We won't talk about that in detail, but that's yet another kind of element of leadership, isn't it? How do we manage those performance management conversations? And that gets a bit trickier. And you might have people that are, a lot of it's behavioural, so it might be tantrums, that kind of thing.
If you sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, if you did in the post-it exercise some sort of, annotate with your initials on it, then that it gives you leverage to come back when you have got performance problems. You put this on the team charter, yet you're not living your values.
Yeah.
It gives greater accountability.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And that we haven't talked about that element of it, Manjula, but that's a really good point, that from a leadership or management perspective, going through this exercise gives you that opportunity then to be able to handle performance-related performance-related situations and conversations much more in line with what that person has enrolled themselves in and agreed to. So it's a really useful way to, become a performance management series of principles as well.
Yeah, it gives you intelligence, doesn't it? It gives you that intel to fall back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a real important piece in there, Justin, about that sort of readout of once it's all collated, then getting everybody back together again, going through it again. This is what we said. Does everybody agree with this? Is there anybody who has anything different to add, would like to see something there, needs more explanation? So everybody's then very, very clear. Collectively, this is ours. We own it. We live and breathe this now.
Yeah, totally.
And then you can, the team self-manages then as well, doesn't that?
Yeah.
So,
Well, in Utopia, they do, yes.
With you giving lots of reminders.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we used to do as a team, which was really useful once we established the contract, or I did call it contract then, not charter, was at the start of every team meeting, as I said, we'd have a monthly online meeting, and that would always be the opening slide. At the quarterly team meeting, as well as it being the opening slide, we'd have the first 10 minutes of the session would be a discussion about how we're living the contract, how we're living elements of the contract. And we would ask everyone in advance of the meeting to come with one example of someone else in the team where they'd seen a great example of living the element of the contract.
Idea.
And we'd start, it was such a great way to start every meeting. Everyone was positive, and people were, praising each other. And it was just a really nice environment. And it tended to be fairly even as well. So the team later told, they used to talk about who they were going to nominate and just make sure that everybody got some recognition and praise in the meeting, which was really good. They started to balance that out. So it did become self-managing to a certain degree. I was facilitating, but they managed themselves.
That builds that trust and psychological safety between each other as well.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. So there's lots of small, these small ideas can be really impactful actually from a team perspective.
When you were doing that, Justin, were you operating in an organization which had values and beliefs? And did they then come in conflict with what the company was saying? These are our values. This is where we want people to act versus how the team charter looked.
So we had 6 different organizational values, and there was a mission and vision. So at the time I was at 3M. So we had, our kind of appraisal, and they called it EC and DP, Employee Contribution and Development Planning and Program. We had a cycle around that, and there was leadership. They used to call them, instead of values, they called them leadership behaviors. So they wanted everybody in the organization to feel a sense of leadership for their role, which actually was really powerful. But what I'd found was that because they were, very high level and corporatized, people didn't feel that connected with them. You'd get into one-to-one reviews and you'd have to remind people what the 6 leadership behaviors were, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm sure I'm doing with that," And actually, when we didn't directly map them, but there were certain elements of that team charter that we had that were really strongly aligned with the leadership behaviors as well. So in the one-to-one reviews, as I was talking to my teams about, their performance in the year, and we had the way they did it, they separated performance and behavior. So performance was your contribution grade, and then the leadership behaviors or values were about how you delivered in the role. And they wanted those two things to be, connected but distinct. So really the team charter was aligned with those values as well. And there was nothing in there that was misaligned or caused any concern. And I guess it's a sense check, isn't it, just to make sure that that there isn't anything overlap or in conflict. And I've never found that we had conflict between what we'd agreed in the team charter versus the organizational values. In fact, quite the opposite. There's really strong alignment between the two. I think what I found the team charter allowed me to do, it's almost made it more granular. Sometimes values can feel a little bit ethereal. Whereas the team charter, as you saw, they're very tangible. Right, we keep one-to-ones outside of meetings. We want to support each other's ideas. We want, you know what I mean? That might be inherent within the values, but it's not always directly translated. Whereas the team charter took it down to, right, let's be really clear as a team how we do this and how we operate.
Yeah, the team charter comes across as like a standard operating procedure, and then the values in terms of interpretation. It's useful to ask, what does this value look like for you? What would you see someone doing if they were, inherently accepting of that value?
Yeah.
And that can be quite different individually to, how the team would behave if they were really committed to that value.
Yeah.
So you could, when I do assessment centers, it's like a competency. You'd say, well, if they were exhibiting this value of integrity, for example, at an acceptable level, it would look like this. If it wasn't good enough, it would look like this. If it was exceptional, it would take the acceptable level, plus this would be the icing on the cake. And you get that really, clear, I think then you're all on the same page, aren't you?
Yeah. You're almost making it competent, bringing it to competencies, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because it's because values get translated as behavior. Yeah. So then it becomes a competency.
Yeah, true. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can see how this evolves, and you can continually improve and develop this with your teams in communication, conversation, in reviews, and as you're reflecting. I think it's I don't think I intended for it to be a management tool, but it ended up being a management tool, and I think
definitely.
that's really useful because very often I've worked in businesses where there is no alignment, nothing is documented, and you see random behaviors, you see inappropriateness, you see perhaps the language isn't respectful, and a lot of that is driven out of the fact that there's no clarity on what's acceptable. And that's where I found exercises like this. It's almost like and interesting. I'm working with a client at the moment where they've said, could you come and run this exercise for us, because they've got a lot of inappropriate behavior going on in their business, and even though they've got a business vision, and they've got their values, the leadership team aren't sure how to tackle it, and they think this exercise, they've heard about this exercise, have been on a couple of these sessions, and said, could you facilitate that session for us, in the hope that it's going to press that be part of that reset. But one of the things I'm challenging them on is to say, this exercise is not a silver bullet.
It's not. They have to live. You're right, Justin. They have to live. I was going to ask you actually, because I've worked in a fintech with similar, where most of my time was spent creating alignment around the founders, the investors, and everybody else to try and move in a particular direction. But that was the point I was going to make. If you've got those values to begin with, I was thinking more in a larger organization, they're not often connected to the team. You know, they've been
No.
drinking in some ivory tower somewhere in a different country even. Now, if you can take parts of it and align it, but that could be the start of having the conversation about trying to create an identity out of that and seeing where people sit in relation to those values that are the company corporate values, and then trying to tie your charter to that and to make it more personal. That's the way I would kind of probably the start point I would take with this, because I think the important thing is what is the start point, and it can be from a sales perspective, how do we create exceptional performance? You know, you've talked before about this plus 20% in terms of people's mindsets.
Yes.
So that's one way of tackling it. But if you have the values there from a corporate perspective, even if they're somewhat detached, that's fine. But in the context of what you're talking about as well is quite interesting, because they have the values and the leaders don't know how to live them. And you're right. I mean, whatever you do you know, as part of that, unless everybody lives them and can sort of tie themselves to them, it doesn't seem to be that effective. I mean, because you could end up with the sales team, for example, being very tied to that, but the founders or the C-level still not getting it. So don't you need to start with those people first?
Totally. Yeah. It has to be led by that leadership team or that executive committee. You're absolutely right, Steve, because if they don't believe in it or support it or keep it alive beyond that single exercise, you may as well not have done it. That's exactly the conversation I'm having, because you also need, you know, there's also this thing about abdicating. Oh, don't worry, we'll get someone external in to come and fix it for us. That's all right if you're going to be there. You know, if they want me there every day, which they don't, and I don't either. But actually, someone's got to pick this up and own it beyond you know, that exercise, and that's the bit where, you know, it's interesting. I'm having a conversation. Normally, you know, I think clients normally think we'll get this guy to come in, he'll just say yes and do it, and I'm kind of going, well, hold on a minute, before we go there's some considerations, and I don't think people are used to that. So it's a useful process to go through, because they have to really consider where this goes beyond that exercise, rather than just, you know, troubleshooter's going to come in and fix everything. It very, you all know this. You know, that very rarely happens in a business. In fact, if anything, it can cause more damage than it resolves if you don't get it right, because people then get even more disengaged. Well, we did that exercise, nobody's living it. I'd spent a lot of time, you know, trying to work through it and contributed, and where are we now? So it's so important. But yeah, really, really good discussion today, everybody. Thank you. We are just past 10 to the hour, so let's wrap up. I won't do my usual kind of closing slides, but I will share. I'll also share my calendar link with you if anybody would like to check in with me one-to-one. Let me just put that in there. I always do that so that you've got that. Thanks so much for your interaction today. Really, really useful. It's in the conversation, the processing, that actually really makes these sessions more applicable. Hopefully you've all got something you can take away today. If you would like to schedule some time with me, do feel free to use the link. Otherwise, it's you're just over another hour into your Friday, so an hour closer to the weekend, right?
Yeah.
Woohoo! Can't wait. Well, I hope the sun shines for you all, and you have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on a future session.
Okay. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Good
Take
to
care.
see you, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
See
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.